I have long been enchanted and intrigued with story. So I decided many months ago to share some of that intrigue with you today and the role that story has in my life and how that has evolved and changed. And I need to share with you, even from before that time, when that was decided many months ago, what happened just in advance of me delivering this sermon for the first time. So this is the second time I've offered this delivery. The first time was at the Chautauqua Institute a couple of weeks ago. And I again had sent them the title and the description in advance of that time, and I looked forward to both being able to offer it there to fellow Unitarian Universalists from around the country and world, and then again here in our beloved space. So we were leaving Saturday morning early for about a 10-hour drive, and this was Friday afternoon. I was putting final touches on the sermon and feeling like, okay, I've arrived. Going into a week of pleasure and fun and learning. And I work down in an office area on our first floor, and my spouse works up on a higher level in his at-home office. And I got a text on my phone from him, and it said, "Have you seen what happened at Chautauqua?" And I texted him back, a little annoyed, and said, "No. What happened?" He said, "You need to see." So I Googled. Salman Rushdie had been attacked, stabbed on the stage that we were going to, in a service and a place that is, I would say, a utopia. I don't know how many of you know it. I didn't. But the Chautauqua Institute is in this, you can't describe it. We have a couple of our parishioners who are very involved, and both of them had said to me, "Please go. I can't put it into words." And that is how it is. The architecture is beautiful. There are all these homes, and they're painted in these glorious colors, and some are owned by the Institute, and some are private, and it's on a lake. And it's this blend of 9 weeks for 157 summers, 9 weeks where every day there is faith, religious services to 29 different denominations, an interfaith service, lectures and talks to stimulate our mind, time in nature and with friends, and then closes every evening with some kind of art, ballet, opera. The most recently one on voice came one night. A utopia. And into that utopia had come this horror of an experience. It feels important to share that, and I invite us all to hold that in our hearts and or your own story as I offer my reflection on story. Because here's the thing. I always thought the end, at the end of stories, is how it is in life. But it's not. It's not. And just when we think the story's figured out, something changes. Tell me a story about when I was born, or when you and Mom met for the first time, or how you became a doctor. Children love to hear stories, and they're not the only ones. We all love stories. Storytelling is an ancient art that has helped humans find meaning for thousands of years. Whether told in drawings on a cave wall, around a campfire, or at a child's bedside before sleep, stories make us believe. They help us to understand and make meaning in life. Imagine, if you will, life, even just this day, without any story, and how overwhelming and confusing it would be. We all hold stories, told and untold, remembered and forgotten, treasured and hidden. We have stories in our minds, we have stories in our bodies, and many believe we have stories in our souls. Adria Peters says, story is the biology of human interaction. And Margaret Atwood writes, you are never going to kill storytelling because it is built into the human plan. We come with it. There was a study done at Stanford Graduate School of Business that found, it's fascinating, that we remember information shared in a story 22 times more than information shared in any other way. Neuroscience shows that neural activity increases 5-fold when we hear a story, as opposed to hearing facts or information. As well, the art of hearing, reading, or watching a story has been proven to make us more empathetic. It releases oxytocin into our bodies. A 2011 research study that was conducted in New Zealand showed that storytelling, quote, fosters empathy, compassion, tolerance, and respect for difference, even when someone is telling someone else's story. It seems that President John F. Kennedy was on to something when he wrote and published Profiles in Courage in 1956. He wrote this book honoring 8 congressmen who he believed demonstrated outstanding courage in the face of extreme political pressure. He wrote it when he took a leave of absence from the Senate for his back surgery. What better way to contend with personal hardship? I imagine it helped him as much to recover, even as it inspires so many people to this day. We know that writing has medicinal qualities. It supports people in overcoming adversity and healing from trauma. There is nothing more important than listening to someone's story. And all we need to do is say, you have been heard. Now, stories have their downside, and I need to lift that up to be in good faith. The powers of story is not diminished when it's used for harm. Stories perpetuate misunderstanding. They can cover oppression, whitewash history. President Kennedy said in his 1961 commencement address to Yale University graduates, and I quote, "The great enemy of truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. Too often," he said, "we hold fast to the cliches of our forebears. We subject all facts to a prefabricated set of interpretations." Thankfully, there is a growing commitment in our country, anyway, to know the truth of our nation's history. Howard Zinn, 150 years, right, of his work. David Silverman's This Land Is Your Land. Elizabeth Wilkerson's book, Cast. There's many. I do encourage all of us to ensure we're believing the actual story of history, be it our countries, our churches, even our families and ourselves. Sharing stories, I'm going to read this just as I wrote and delivered it, so you know I brought you all with me to Chautauqua. Sharing stories was one of the most powerful experiences that my congregation and I shared when I first started as their minister 5 years ago. Story was our very first monthly ministry theme. I don't know if you remember that. People told me, we should do this all year. I hope we do it always. But it made sense. When I came to Newburyport, I wanted to hear their stories, your stories. I wanted to hear the stories of the congregation. I knew what it said in that search packet and all that was written up, and not that that wasn't true, but I needed the stories to know you. And as it turned out, we wanted to hear each other's. So the mere act of highlighting that desire and then listening to one another's stories began to establish trust between us. I invited people to share their stories with me in writing. I recently reread those, by the way, and I'm looking at some of you who sent them in. I have them still and reread them at least once a year to remind myself of what they taught me about this congregation and some of its members. Newburyport also has a tradition of having members and friends share their journeys of faith. A person stands in front of the congregation and tells their story, as some of you have, of growing up, how they came to the church, what it means to them. And woven into those stories is their journey of faith. We hear what they were raised to believe, what questions that they had, experiences they lived through, and where they are today. And those stories are treasures. I also know stories will be a critical part of how we celebrate our 300th anniversary in 2025. And we've already committed to those stories being extensions not only of pride and celebration, but of reparation and truth-telling, as much a celebration of our achievements as an acknowledgement of our shortcomings. In September of 2018, I said to my then new congregation, we are a people who see a future that is embracing of the past and who is open to the new. Judy Wilkins Smith says, we use and create patterns as a way to navigate life. So it's important at this point that we take time to understand story from a structural perspective. Until a few years ago, I didn't realize that the structure of story is universal. You will hear it sometimes called the hero or the heroine's journey. But coming to understand this structure has made significant changes in my approach to life, as well as to my own writing. Many people write about this. For today, I'm going to use the language of Christopher Vogel in The Writer's Journey. And we're going to go through this circle of story. There is always a starting point in a story. Vogel calls this ordinary reality. It is where life is just before the story begins. If you imagine your entire life, it might be where you sort of cut in on a specific time period or an aspect of your life. We have the story of today. We have the story of many periods and times and parts of evolution in our life, but always there's a starting point. And then there is some call to adventure. It might be an idea or an inspiration that we have, someone inviting us to do something, or a response we're having to something that is going on around us. Inevitably, and I'd encourage you to be thinking of something in your past or current time, we refuse and resist that call. Common signs of this resistance include thoughts like, I couldn't possibly. That's ridiculous. Who, me? Sound familiar yet? Of course, we can think of Moses in the Hebrew Bible, and again, I encourage us to think about ourselves. What's the current internal battle that you are fighting? After some period of resistance, and it can be days, months, or decades, or a whole life, help does arrive. It is the meeting with the mentor. Something happens that moves us out of resistance and into action. We make the decision. We tell others about it. We quit our job, sign up for the course, get into the car, pick up the telephone, write the letter. And we hope, of course, that that is the end of the story. But it never is the end of the story. Some of you are thinking, yeah, I know that. Well, I didn't. I always read those stories that said the end. But it wouldn't be story if that were the end, right? So we make our decision and we begin moving forward, and there are inevitably tests, enemies, internal and external, allies, friends, unexpected turns of events, challenges. We take, metaphorically, 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. We move forward, we give up. We go forward, we advance, and we get sidetracked or pushed back. It is like a maze. Every time we get up again, we're certain that's the final time. Got it. I got it this time. I'm not going to fall, not going to lose my resolve, not going to become discouraged. But you see, both of these phases, resisting the call, experiencing these trials and tribulations, they're part of the story. And it can go on for a very long time. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we decide and we move to completion very quickly. But those aren't generally the stories we tell or remember. Those things happen every day of our lives, of course. We decide to get up and do what we're expected to do. We don't necessarily tell those stories. Honestly, they're also not the stories people want to hear. Who among us needs to hear how easy something was for someone else? Right? Oh, yes, I was called to end, and then it's great. Many of you know I'm in recovery, and I'll share from that perspective. For example, when people tell their stories about putting down an addiction, addictive substance behavior, and they go, yes, I did, and it's good. I want to go, really? There's more to that story. And we might even call those people a braggart. Back to our how do stories work, however. At some point, right, we're in this tug of war, we're in this resistance, things do turn the corner, and the challenge is over. We graduate, we achieve the goal, we come out and speak that truth, we send that letter, we pick up that phone. Again, small and large, life-changing, and simply soul-settling decisions. But we've done it. And I need to just say, we have a lot of choice in this. Stories aren't guaranteed to get to that point. We at some point have to choose to let it be so. Now, that's often considered the climax. Generally or often there's a ritual that might accompany that. Not always. Here's the thing. After that, there's some kind of time that's called like assimilation, where we get used to this new life. And we can't imagine that that achievement will ever become the new normal. Think about COVID for a moment. And it does. It does become the new normal. We survived what we think we can't. We risked what we feared doing. We said the words we harbored inside. We made the decision. We fought the battles. The thing has been accomplished or achieved or come to some kind of fruition. And then a story starts all over again. Always a dream, always rejection of it, always help, always triumph, always transition. Always a new dream. That's story. Every single time. So you may be thinking to yourself, okay, this is interesting, but what's the point? As I've said several times, for me, the point is no one ever told me this. I was under the impression that the goal in life is to achieve that one thing or get through that one time. And then things would be over. We would have arrived. I never knew the story cycle always starts again, as long as we complete the cycle and don't become stuck. Also, I need to lift up a name that all of us have a multitude of stories in our lives, all happening simultaneously. But you know the one I'm calling you to. You know the story I'm inviting you to consider. You know where you are in the process, the step you never took, the truth you never told, the struggle you think is the end. The most surprising experience for me of this was when I actually became a minister, an ordained minister, 2015. I had resisted that call for 17 years, and then spent 8 years training. In other words, I spent 25 years, or a quarter of a century, in that story. I really did think that was the end of the story. So imagine my surprise when, after arriving, another story started. A new calling that expands my ministry and defines it and illumines more of my true self. I began to write, which was actually a calling I had experienced much, much younger than that of ministry. I'm wiser this time, though. I know the journey of my life doesn't end with completing a book or some publication. There will be a new story or continuation of my life story, even though I cannot know what that will be until I've completed that story. And I think that's an important thing for us to believe and understand. There is a way that we can't know the next story until we complete the one that we're in. We all, as I said, have many stories happening simultaneously, each at a different point in its process, but it helps to realize this, reflect upon, and I invite you to do this. Do you like where you are in your particular stories? I also want to help us remember we could literally be living out an ancestral story, a family pattern that started long before us. Do we choose to change that story? If you do some research into your family patterns, you may be amazed to see how many of your stories are not yours alone. They didn't begin with you. It might be a parent, grandparent, or even much further back. In the Hindu tradition, those struggles are called prarabdha karma. It helps when we don't resist them. They show up as these experiences or patterns in our life that we don't understand and we can't avoid. The only way to resolve it is to go through it. Reading out of the Upanishad, verse 21, it says, "O intelligent man, spend your life always in the knowing of supreme bliss, enjoying the whole of your prarabdha karma." Meaning, accept it so we can change it. That's one of the key paradoxes of life. People will say to me, you can't, acceptance is wrong. You can't accept, that means that you're saying it's okay. And I'm saying, actually, it's the opposite. Accept so things can change. As I said at the start of this sermon, as I wrap up my reflections, we hold the stories of our own life and of our ancestors in our minds, our bodies, and many people believe in our souls. We're interconnected with stories of our country, even if we think we're not, difficult and victorious. We're connected and part of the stories of our families, even if we don't know them. Our churches, even when we're brand new. Our communities. We are not, however, victims to these stories. We can choose how we're in relationship with them and discern our steps along the journey. We cannot become who we're meant to be without first understanding who we've been and who we are today. This is true for groups as well as individuals. As Unitarian Universalists, a religious tradition founded on covenant or promises, I think we need to learn the spiritual practice of storytelling. Telling and listening, witnessing one another's stories until they don't need to be told anymore. And as we listen and tell, let's keep in our hearts the words of Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis, one of my mentors. She says, keep your eyes on all that is good and beautiful and possible in the world. Because the stories that we tell create the people we become. Amen.